This morning, we are looking at the economy. Everyone who lives in Nigeria by now understands clearly that this economy is grappling with severe economic crisis, with inflation hovering around 36% and widespread poverty exacerbated by the fuel subsidy removal. Peaceful protests organized on social media have been labeled as incitement to violence by authorities, who have arrested 3 individuals for supporting the protests online, and others. Amnesty International and the National Human Rights Commission have urged respect for protesters' rights and have called for evidence on human rights violation during protest. The National Human Rights Commission vows to continue monitoring the situation to protect human rights, of course. And joining us to discuss this dimension is very soon, of course, is Mr. Onyekpere, who is a lawyer and executive director of the Center for Social Justice. Good morning, Mr. Eze. Or Barrister.
Good morning, my pleasure.
Which one you prefer? It's been a while since we spoke. We are glad to have you join us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Help us, give us a sense of your own assessments of how the Nigerian authority, especially talking about the police and the Nigerian government in general, has handled the issues of human rights as far as this protest is concerned. Is day 8 from our counting. Teenagers alone, I think there were 5 of them that have been killed between Zaria, Gombe, and Kano and Bauchi, of course. What do you make of this constant call, by civil society people to the government to conduct themselves in a manner that truly demonstrates that we operate a democracy in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. My take is that the police don't seem to have been properly trained, instructed, and grilled on how to protect protesters, as well as ensure law and order, that nobody takes the laws into his hands. First of all, you don't go to protect protesters and the first thing you have is a live bullet. And that is always a first resort. At a time, you have to do a lot of things, even if you have to use tear gas, first of all, or you have to use water cannons or plastic bullets. The resort to live bullets should be the last. When all other attempts have failed and there is a direct threat to lives and property and law and order, that's the only time you are allowed, or in self-defense, to resort to the use of live bullets. But it appeared it was the first line of what they were taught to do. Now, even before you get into what the police did, I think there is a bigger challenge, which is even more fundamental to human rights. It is the idea of the rule of law. It is the idea of the judex, the judiciary, as the last hope of the common person and the defender of the rights of the oppressed. But what happened in these last demonstrations questions the jurisprudence of the courts. In Abuja, in Lagos, and in other states, somebody went to court, whether it's the police or the attorney general, and there was no respondent. There was no defendant. They purportedly claimed to have gotten an order restricting protesters to a certain venue. Okay? So in a properly constituted suit at law, I will sue you because you offended my rights or you oppressed me. So there is somebody who I should even serve court documents after the order had been given. Even if it was supposed to be expired, the case in court. So those orders that we are given against the whole world by judges, there is a very big question mark if they are orders properly so-called. And nobody should start giving us that impression that the judiciary that should protect rights has joined the other part of it to be used as an instrument for social oppression. I don't think that's good for the image of the judiciary. You must have parties in court so that somebody doesn't rush in. Okay, even the order of ex parte judgment, you are saying there is an emergency. The protesters gave over 1 month's notice. You had all opportunities to engage them. You had all opportunities to go to court before. On the eve of the protest, you quickly rush to the courts. Just like what has always happened each time NLC wants to go on demonstration. This does not give the judiciary a good image, and the judiciary should stop lending itself to give such rulings and orders that make it extremely unpopular and that have doubtful jurisprudential basis. So that's my first take.
Yeah, and looking at what is happening right now, if we can just zoom out from Nigeria a little bit and consider the global stage where a handful of countries across 3 or 4 continents are also experiencing this. I mean, we can talk about Nigeria and Kenya in recent weeks. We can talk about Venezuela immediately after the presidential elections, the disputed presidential elections. You can also talk about what's happening in places like Bangladesh, for instance, and also most recently with the xenophobic attacks that led to the protests and counter-protests in the United Kingdom. Are there some common denominators there where we can say law enforcement on a global scale are not good managers of, civil disobedience like this?
Well, like a growing trend is that the police is always behaving the same way, although with different levels of civility. The lessons that should be learned, like in the particular, there's a country you mentioned where the prime minister had to flee, okay? Because his security forces were overwhelmed and they couldn't see themselves just killing innocent civilians because these are their brothers and sisters. And unfortunately for the police, they are as poorly paid as everybody. There is no special supermarket or grocery where the police and the soldiers shop. Most of the people on the streets are as hungry as those young men and women who are protesting. So I don't even see the basis for them to be using lethal fire. Well, I think the lesson should be more in the management of the protest by the authorities. At least in Kenya, you saw where the president responded by saying this new tax law, which everybody is complaining against, we don't want it again. He said we are no longer going on with it. He also had to sack his entire cabinet. Okay? He also stopped the monies he was supposed to give to his wife, the first lady. So you could see some response from the authorities to say, we've had you, we are doing this. Why this is the exact opposite in Nigeria. Those protesting have not had any of their single demands met. All we have from the president in his speech is a rehash of what he has done and doubling down. So there was not even a concession. And the worst part of it is that since he got knowledge of the protest, he has several meetings with all manner of groups. He had with traditional rulers, he had with religious leaders. I am not aware he met a single youth group. He did not invite a single youth group to a dialogue. Those who were going to protest, those said we had a grievance. None of them was invited. So is this old transactional method of call a traditional ruler, call the senator, call a religious leader, those are small boys and girls, let them go and talk to them, that their children, they should calm down. That is no longer the way forward. And that is why we have this kind of scenario. We expect the government to manage these things better, to be able to give some concessions based on those demands so that the people will be assuaged. Because even if the protest dies down now, it's like you try to simmer down a burning fire. You've not totally removed it. At some point in time in the future, it will come up again and it may be a bigger conflagration because the people will say, okay, since we came this way, you didn't listen. Maybe we have to do something that everybody will shake his head so that we can now all sit down at the table.
All right. Barrister Onyekpere, how much do you think that the police conduct and response to this protester was actually inflamed by the body language of the presidency? Prior to the protest, we saw all kinds of subtle threats by supporters or apologies of this government. We saw the security agencies making statements to the effect that they have uncovered reports about miscreants who are preparing to take advantage of the protest and all of that. And then we saw that in this case, protesters were not armed. They were not causing any damage, only for live bullets, guns to be pointed at them and shot directly at their reaction. Do you think the police were sort of encouraged by the body posture of the presidency.
Now, if you were following a few days or 1 or 2 days to the protests, there were protests against the protests. The authority, the ruling party, government sympathizers organized a protest against a protest that is yet to be held. And like you said, the security agencies were saying all kinds of usual things. They will say they've uncovered A or B. And for some of us, the joke is that if you have such capacity to uncover all these things you always claim, why don't you have the capacity to uncover the sponsors of Boko Haram, the shenanigans in the Northwest, everywhere, and arrest them and call them to order so that these things will stop? So at the end of the day, they were encouraged by the fact that the presidency and the ruling party apparatchik was not interested. I mean, we heard the Senate president said people can protest while he and his colleague are busy eating. He hasn't, the video is here out there. Everybody saw it. We also saw the vice president also call people idiots because they were going to protest. So the language being used by those in authority who spoke shortly before that incident showed some level of contempt. It's like there is nothing to protest about. You guys are wasting your time. So, of course, there's no way it wouldn't influence the conduct of the security agencies because they somehow know that they will be protected by the authorities in anything they do. So I think that must have influenced them as well. At least I gave you 2 concrete examples of 2 unbecoming statements, which in other climes, these people should have been under the fire. They should have at least been made to apologize or even possibly lose that seat because it's unbecoming to refer to citizens as idiots.
Barrister Onyekpere, let's talk about something that was even more telling, especially with regards to the actions of the security agencies. This past Thursday, during a stakeholders meeting with other security chiefs, the Inspector General of the Nigerian Police alluded or stated as a matter of fact that no live ammunition was used in the management of the protests and demonstrations across the country, which is against the facts that we all know that police and military officers, especially just this week, on that same Tuesday, that Tuesday morning, a boy was killed in Zaria. And also the police just confirmed yesterday in Azare, Bauchi State, that the police shot one teenager in that area also. What are we looking at here, especially against the backdrop of what happened with NSAS, the inquiry that followed, and how many civil society organizations are trying to push a legal case against some of those officers who were involved in the killings of protesters here? When you have the police boss say categorically, in clear terms, that live ammunition was not used, contrary to what we see and believe is the reality that happened on these days of protest. What are we looking at here if we're supposed to move forward with some sort of litigation or accountability of those in charge of managing this protest?
It's unfortunate for the police boss who has the direct responsibility of starting the process of accountability and calling his men and women to order to take such a hardcore categorical position which runs against the grain of available evidence covered by the print and electronic media and even the citizen journalist social media. We all saw those things. Nobody has told us that they are made up. So the implication is that if accountability has to start, he has to be part of those to be held accountable. Because if he's denying that nobody was shot at, nobody died, at a point we have evidence that people have been killed, then it appears maybe he has some role to play, maybe the instructions he gave to his boys. So what we should think of is that when everything has died down, that civil society organizations, the media, and every discerning Nigerian should, one way or the other, come together to see how we can hold these people accountable through either continued raising of these issues in the print and electronic media, through possible cases to be filed by lawyers in court, through possible petitions to be sent to the presidency, National Assembly, and other authorities and exploring the mechanisms under the United Nations system where local remedies are unavailable, because it appears that may be the situation, so that the international responsibility of Nigeria under various treaties and conventions to which we are a party, the Universal Declaration, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, African Charter on Human and People's Rights, we can upscale our petitions to those authorities so that it becomes clear in the international arena that Nigeria signs treaties and is not respecting those treaties, especially in the most fundamental of the fundamental rights, because the right to life is the fulcrum upon which other rights revolve. Once the right to life is taken away, all other rights are taken away. So rights are only for the living. And once you don't respect the fundamental right to life, that's a big shame. That's the end of it.
All right, Mr. Onyekpere, a coalition of civil society, I think 48 hours ago, called on the president to compel the military and police authorities to identify those shooters, as a first step, to procuring justice. We saw in the case of Zaria that the chief of a cantonment was present at the burial ceremony, and some paltry 300,000 was donated to the family. We're not exactly sure what that money was meant for. And I think in the case of Bauchi, the police authority openly, confirming the death of somebody. Is that enough? You talked about other steps that can be taken. If you were to advise the president at this point, what exactly do we need to do, first of all, to restore confidence and to begin to ameliorate some of these negative steps that have been taken by the security agencies?
I think I was reading something of a particular boy who was shot by a soldier.
Yeah.
And I think what I heard yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, is that they've identified and arrested the particular soldier from whose gun that bullet was discharged. So that's the first step. It's not just to arrest him and do a cover-up. There should be proper investigation into the circumstances that led to that shooting. If it was something that was done recklessly, the soldier's life was not under attack, or there was no threat at all, and he simply abused ammunition given to him by the taxpayers, of course, there's a procedure both under military law and under civil law. So he should be face the consequences, prosecuted, possibly discharged from the armed forces, and then face the law. For those ones that the police are involved, there's also a procedure. So I expect the Commissioner of Police to do their jobs for proper investigation and possibly liaise with the Ministry of Justice in those states for prosecution. They are not supposed to start doing listening to the Inspector General of Police for a simple matter that is a clear crime, because they don't need to report to him to prosecute cases in their various states and jurisdictions. So I think that the important thing is documentation. We just have a general case, 10 people, 15 people died. If there could be a proper documentation of those who were killed, the circumstances under which they were killed, what has happened to them, whether they have been buried, they're still in the morgue, who their relations and parents are, the relatives of the victim, that would be a first step to engage the authorities to say, it's not just that 10 people were killed. These are the 10 persons, A, Y, C, D, from so local government, from so what, this is the name of the father, the brothers, the sisters, this is where they are, and they're interested in A, B, C, D to happen. Otherwise, it will just be left in open air.
Yeah, and Barry said there's this conversation around certain justifications for the actions of Nigerian police officers or other security personnel that were on duty to provide maybe cover during the protest, or even to protect against vandalism of public and private property, which we've seen across several parts, whether it's Kano or Kaduna or in Plateau State or in other parts of the country. Now, we've also seen some of those disturbing videos, especially in Kano, one that was trending where I don't know whether it's fair to categorize everybody as protesters, because we do know that there are some people who took advantage of some of those protests to exploit the situation by looting and becoming a nuisance during that particular process. We also saw some youths overrun a police unit and take hold of an armored personnel carrier in Kaduna. We also saw some of those participants in that protest ambush a police officer who was armed with an AK-47 rifle. We didn't see to the very end of that video, but it's clear that he didn't use his gun against those who were attacking him. At what point do we also try to clarify and separate some of those issues? Because in some of those cases, there were some sort of justification as to why excessive force was used, especially in relation to the destruction of property and some attacks on police personnel. How do we separate it, especially if we're expecting certain petitions to come in the weeks and months to come?
Yes, there should be a clear demarcation between those involved in peaceful protests and those who went out of their way to vandalize and destroy public property, as well as loot warehouses owned by the public and private citizens. Those ones were clear criminal actions for which they should be arrested and prosecuted. But what we are talking about are those people who were unarmed, who were in a group singing songs, doing the normal work, and who were now subjected to lethal weapons or any other instrument that was supposed to cause grievous harm or take away life. So I perfectly agree with you that they should be separated. But this is what happens when the state leaves a lot of people behind without education, without social security, without health services, without an iota of hope for tomorrow. Because I noticed one thing, across many of the northern states, most of the people I saw, we are fairly young, and they look like the street boys and girls, the marjories. Maybe they heard there was a protest, everybody joined. Maybe if you saw them, if you could call out some of them to say, what exactly is the protest about? They may not be able to explain, whether in English or in their native language. So this is what happened when you have a street army of the unemployed, undereducated, nobody takes care of them, without a proper family base. So it was not unexpected that it could degenerate. And that's why it is also important that in this kind of scenario going forward, the authorities should try to find out who really are in charge so that you can know who exactly to talk to. And not this idea that the protest is faceless, because this kind of facelessness may degenerate. But it is easier when an else is protesting. You know, there is a man called Jajero, who is the president of NLC. You know, there's a president of TUC. You know people who you can make a phone call to and say, enough guys, come in, let us talk. Let's offer you some concessions. Or even, what exactly do you want so that there will be peace? So by the security agencies not doing their homework well, that's why it appears there's no leader, there's no face, and then there's nobody you can even now call to say, since it's like nobody's in charge. And that shouldn't be the case going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eze Onyekpere, for those insightful and thought-provoking comments this morning, and always for finding time to be part of our program.
Thank you.
All right, we've been speaking with Mr. Eze Onyekpere, who is a lawyer and the executive director of the Center for Social Justice. We'll take a quick breather. When we return, this time we'll be looking at headlines that made it to select national newspapers this morning. Please don't go away.